you. And on the line with us is Geroge Goehl. He is the co-executive director of People's Action and the People's Action Institute. peoplesaction.org is the website. You can tweet him at Geroge Goehl, G-O-E-H-L, or at PPLS Action. Geroge, welcome.
Hey, glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Your press release points out that there's been some actually good news that came out of this election. You say, in Nevada, we elected the first Latina U.S. senator. In Wisconsin, we elected a longtime community champion of the House. In Minnesota, we elected the first Somali American immigrant to the state assembly. In Arizona, we removed one of the most vicious anti-immigrant sheriffs in the history of our country. In Arizona, Colorado, Maine, and Washington, significant majorities of voters favored ballot measures to increase the minimum wage, bring it closer to a living wage. That's the good news. What's the bad news?
Well, the bad news is we just elected a known racist, misogynist, crazy man to be the president of the United States, and
and put his enablers in charge of the House, the Senate, and soon to be the Supreme Court.
It's beyond terrifying. And having been with a lot of our members across the country in the last couple of days, people are, I think, have some kind of form of PTSD around what's happened and are really terrified, particularly the women membership, immigrants, undocumented people, Muslims, and Black people are truly terrified around what this means.
Yeah, I remember a similar concern in the 2000 election. What do we and in the after the 2000 election, there was not a lot of organizing. There was not a lot of action. Of course, there wasn't progressive talk radio at the time. Social media was in its infancy. And George W. Bush hadn't really done anything awful until after 9/11, when he invaded both Afghanistan and Iraq, and I would argue both illegally. And that spawned an anti-war movement, which, but in 2000, basically, it was the anti-globalization movement was the only thing out there, at least that I recall in a big way. The Seattle protests in the late 90s, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So what's happening now? What are you all doing at peoplesaction.org, and what are other groups doing that you may be collaborating with? And what do you see as a positive, forward-looking, action-based agenda?
Yeah. So here's the good news in terms of how we're reacting. I have never seen this level of solidarity among the national progressive organizations in my lifetime. So from 2 a.m. in the evening on the night of the election, many of us were on the phone together, devising strategy, creating a division of labor, and those calls started again at 7 a.m. in the morning, in a very flexible, solidarity-minded, movement-minded relationship with each other. People are moving quick, splitting up the work, and figuring out how to do really good defense, which we'll have to have, and then go on offense. And then the four big things that folks are focused on is community defense. How do we actually protect communities of color, Muslim communities, LGBT communities from direct violence, which seems very possible. Second, how can we, at best we can, block which is going to be a really hateful and dangerous policy agenda. So where can we block things? And then how do we turn defense and offense that sets us up for future elections? And then we got to stay on offense. Left's often good at defense, but we got to stay on offense. I think we can move a bold economic agenda in cities and states, and we got to keep doing that. We have to have places where we're actually lining up wins. I think people are pretty demoralized right now, and nothing changes that like winning. And then we've got to figure out how to go connect with our brothers and sisters in rural and white working class America. And it's something that, I think we've definitely failed at as a kind of left, and certainly the Democratic Party's failed at, and something I'd love to talk more about on this show. And we've got to go make some inroads there. And that is not work you turn around overnight. But as somebody that grew up in very rural southern Indiana, it can be done.
Yeah, that used to be Democratic country.
Oh, totally. I was at a county fair in Wisconsin the other day, and there were Trump shirts abound, and nobody was wearing a Democratic shirt anywhere. And I was like, wow, when I was growing up, it would have been much different. There might have been some of both, but you could count on some Democrats there. But I feel like the stew was cooked between right wing Republican fear mongering, Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, all of that over the last 20 years or so, and then a neoliberal Democratic agenda that was not delivering for people. The stew was cooked, and Trump just showed up and stirred it, and ended up winning the election.
Yeah. May I add climate to your agenda?
Without question. I mean, I think that's. I mean, there's a much bigger agenda, but I think that the thought of losing 4 years on climate change is unthinkable.
Yeah.
And so we've got to figure out how to move hard on that. We'll do a lot of that at the city and state level, and there's a lot of that work happening. But we can't lose 4 more years.
So somebody who's watching or listening right now, and they're thinking, gee, I'd like to get involved. There's a lot of great groups out there. Yours is not the only one, and I'm sure you'd be the first to say that. peoplesaction.org. We're talking with Geroge Goehl. But what's your suggestion for somebody who is like, okay, I've had enough. I'm gonna tag you're it, right? I'm gonna get active.
Yeah. Well, I'd say 2 things. You have to join an organization. I think you just got to be in an organization. So we just did MoveOn.org, People's Action, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and some other groups did about 150 events last night. So really on less than 12 hours notice. And
were these the Trump is not my president protests that are happening around the country?
Those were part of them. Some of those were organized, even further in advance.
Mm-hmm.
In case something happened. I mean, some of those I think were originally organized to maybe more move towards accountability with an HRC win.
Mm-hmm.
But some of these were 25 people in Edina, Minnesota, or Asheville, North Carolina, and some were 1,000 people in Oakland and other places. But I was at one in Chicago last night. They got announced 2 hours before it started. 125 people in a neighborhood came, and people wanted to move to what's next, and they wanted to be enlisted. So I think what we've got to do is figure out ways to enlist people, not just to be on a list or to engage in Facebook, be enlisted in a kind of real on the ground force that's going to be a resistance. So I would say people ought to join organizations and go to events and get plugged in, and then it's up to us to really organize people. But the event I was at last night, two big things, 3 things I took away. People needed to heal. They needed to actually digest and process this stuff together,
right,
and be mad and cry and scared together.
We just have 10 seconds, George.
Oh, okay. They needed to know what's next, and they needed to know there was going to be leadership, and that really had a big impact on people.
Geroge Goehl, he's the co-executive director.
This is the Thom Hartmann program
of People's Action Network, People's Action Institute, peoplesaction.org. And George, thank you for being with us.
Hey, I appreciate it.
Good talking. We'll be back.